Attention! The case you are about to hear was concealed for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is at this exact moment, because this story began at exactly the same hour. In the spring of 1973, a farmhouse in rural Montana burned to the ground. When firefighters arrived, they found something that made no sense. 17 bodies, all arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward, and in the center, an empty chair. The investigation was closed within 3 months. The files were sealed. The families were told it was mass suicide, but the firefighters who entered that house first, they never spoke about what they truly saw that night. The story begins much earlier. In the year 1958, a man named Samuel Garrett purchased 300 acres of land near the town of Millbrook, Montana. Population 642. Garrett was 41 years old. A former theology professor from Boston. He arrived with 7 followers. They called themselves the Witnesses of the Final Dawn. Local newspapers mentioned them twice, once when they arrived, once when they bought the land. Then, silence. Garrett was known for one belief above all others. The world would end on September 21st, 1973. Not approximately, not symbolically, that exact date. He claimed to have received this knowledge through visions that began in 1954, visions of fire, of darkness, of a reckoning that would spare only those who had prepared their souls through what he called the cleansing. The cleansing was never fully explained in any surviving document, but former members who left the group between 1960 and 1965 described it as a ritual of purification, fasting, prayer, and something else. Something they were forbidden to discuss. Those who spoke of it used careful words. They said it required sacrifice. They said it required surrender. They said it required blood. But the early years seemed harmless enough. The group grew slowly. By 1962, there were 23 members living on the farm. They grew vegetables, raised chickens, kept to themselves. The town of Millbrook viewed them as harmless eccentrics, religious fanatics perhaps, but not dangerous. Not yet. In the summer of 1963, a woman named Margaret Cole disappeared from the compound. She was 34 years old. She had joined the group in 1961 with her husband Thomas. When Thomas came to town asking about her, he said she had left to visit family in Oregon, but Margaret had no family in Oregon. Her sister lived in Billings, and when her sister called the sheriff asking questions, Thomas Cole became defensive. He said Margaret had made her choice. He said she was free to leave. He said she simply moved on. No investigation was opened. Margaret Cole was an adult. She had left no note. No evidence of foul play existed. The case was filed as a voluntary departure, but her sister never believed it. Years later, in 1976, she told a journalist something strange. She said that 3 weeks before Margaret vanished, she had received a letter. In it, Margaret wrote about a ceremony, a preparation. She wrote that Samuel Garrett had chosen her for something important, something that would prove her faith, something that would guarantee her salvation when the end came. The letter ended with a single sentence. "If you do not hear from me again, know that I have been welcomed into the light." After Margaret's disappearance, the group became more isolated. They stopped coming to town for supplies. They built a fence around the property, tall, wooden, with a locked gate. Visitors were turned away, even family members. A man named Robert Finch tried to see his daughter in 1965. She had joined the group 2 years earlier. She was 19 years old. When Robert arrived at the gate, he was met by 2 men. They told him his daughter was well. They told him she was engaged in deep spiritual work. They told him she would contact him when the time was right. He never saw her again. But something else was happening during those years. Something the town did not know about. Something revealed only after the fire. Between 1963 and 1973, At least 9 members of the Witnesses of the Final Dawn disappeared from the compound. Not all at once. 1 every year or 2, sometimes less. The pattern was always the same. A member would be chosen for the cleansing. They would participate in a private ceremony. And then they were gone. Other members were told they had ascended, that they had achieved spiritual purification so complete that they no longer needed physical form, that they had become part of the light, that they were waiting on the other side, waiting for September 21st, 1973, waiting for the rest of the group to join them. In the spring of 1970, a young man named Daniel Marsh managed to escape the compound. He was 22 years old. He had been with the group since 1968. He walked 17 miles to the nearest gas station and called his parents. They drove from Billings to pick him up. Daniel was emaciated. His hands shook constantly. He refused to eat for 3 days. When he finally spoke, he told them things that made no sense. He said the disappearances were real. He said the chosen ones did not ascend. He said they were killed, ritually, carefully, in a room beneath the main farmhouse, a room with stone walls, a room with drainage in the floor, a room where Samuel Garrett performed what he called the ultimate surrender. Daniel said he had been present for one of these ceremonies. He said he had been forced to watch. He said the victim went willingly, singing hymns, praying, believing until the very end that they were being transformed. Daniel's parents begged him to go to the police. He refused. He said no one would believe him. He said Garrett had prepared for this. He said there were no bodies, no evidence. Everything was burned. Everything was buried. Everything disappeared into the Montana wilderness. And besides, the other members would never testify. They believed. They truly believed. Daniel Marsh died in 1972. Car accident. Single vehicle late at night. The police report noted no signs of foul play. But his mother always wondered. She wondered if someone from the compound had found him. She wondered if Samuel Garrett had decided he knew too much. She wondered if the accident was really an accident at all. As September 21st, 1973 approached, the remaining members of the Witnesses of the Final Dawn prepared for the end. They sold everything they owned. They burned personal possessions. They wrote farewell letters to family members, letters that would be mailed only if the prophecy failed, letters that were never sent. Because on the morning of September 20th, 1973, something changed. According to the sole survivor of what happened next, Samuel Garrett gathered the group in the main farmhouse. There were 17 members left. Garrett stood before them and announced that he had received a final vision. The end would come, but not as they expected, not as a cosmic event visible to the world, but as a private rapture, a transformation available only to those willing to make the final sacrifice, the ultimate cleansing. He told them that the previous members had not died. They had crossed over. They were waiting, and now it was time for the rest to join them. But there was a requirement. They must go together, all at once, in perfect unity. Only then would the pathway open. Only then would they be received. Some members hesitated. A woman named Linda Hurst asked what would happen to their bodies. Garrett smiled. He said their bodies were irrelevant. Shells, prisons, the moment of crossing would burn them away. He said they would feel no pain, only light, only peace, only the presence of those who had gone before. Linda Hurst was 36 years old. She had been with the group since 1961. She had given Garrett everything, her savings, her time, 12 years of her life. And now, she was being asked to give the last thing she had. She looked around the room. She saw faces she had known for years, faces filled with fear, faces filled with faith, faces filled with something else, something like relief. Because after 12 years of waiting, it was almost over. The ceremony began at dusk on September 20th. The members formed a circle in the main room of the farmhouse. In the center was a single wooden chair. Samuel Garrett sat in it. He led them in prayer. He led them in song. He told them to close their eyes and open their hearts. He told them the moment was approaching. He told them to be ready. And then he stood up. He walked out of the circle. He walked to the door. He looked back once, and he left. The members did not move. They thought it was part of the ritual. They thought he was testing their faith. They waited. Minutes passed, then hours. They remained in the circle, holding hands, praying, waiting for the transformation, waiting for the light, waiting for the end. But the end did not come. At some point during the night, smoke began to fill the room. Later, investigations determined that gasoline had been poured along the exterior walls of the farmhouse. The fire started in 4 places simultaneously. The doors had been locked from the outside, the windows barred. The members realized too late what was happening. They tried to break free, but the smoke was too thick, the heat too intense, the structure too old and dry. 17 people died in that fire. 16 were found in the circle formation, their hands still clasped together. 1 was found near the back door, clawed fingers embedded in the wood. Samuel Garrett was never seen again. The sole survivor was not in the farmhouse that night. Her name was Rebecca Winters. She was 28 years old. She had been feeling ill and was resting in one of the outer cabins. When she saw the flames, she ran toward the farmhouse. But the heat drove her back. She watched it burn. She heard the screaming, and she knew. Rebecca Winters gave a full statement to investigators. She told them everything about the disappearances, about the ceremonies, about Daniel Marsh, about the prophecy, about the ultimate cleansing. She begged them to search the property, to dig beneath the farmhouse, to find the bodies of the others, the ones who had been chosen over the years. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. They excavated the basement. They found stone walls. They found drainage, they found burn marks, but they found no bodies, no bones, no evidence of the previous victims. Garrett had been thorough, or the bodies had been moved, or buried elsewhere on the 300 acres of wilderness. The case was officially closed in December of 1973. The deaths were ruled as mass suicide facilitated by arson. An arrest warrant was issued for Samuel Garrett, but he was never found. No bank accounts were traced, no border crossings recorded, no sightings confirmed. He simply vanished. Rebecca Winters spent the rest of her life trying to make people understand. She gave interviews, she wrote letters, she contacted journalists and researchers. She said Samuel Garrett had never intended to die with his followers. She said the prophecy was a lie. She said the visions were a lie. She said everything had been designed for one purpose: to create a group of people so devoted, so isolated, so desperate for meaning, that they would willingly die when he asked them to. She said the previous disappearances had been practice, a way to test the group's faith, a way to normalize the idea of sacrifice, a way to prepare them for the final act. She said Garrett had been planning it for years, since the very beginning. Since 1958. She said he was not insane, he was not delusional, he was calculating. Methodical, patient. She said he had studied cults, he had studied manipulation, he had studied exactly how far people could be pushed when they believed they were part of something larger than themselves. And she said one more thing. Something investigators never confirmed, something that appeared in only one interview conducted in 1978 by a graduate student researching religious extremism. Rebecca said that 2 weeks before the fire, she had found a notebook in Garrett's cabin. She had been cleaning, he was away, and she saw it on his desk. She opened it. Inside were lists, names, dates, calculations. And at the bottom of the last page, a single sentence written in red ink: prophecy fails, faith remains, begin again. She said she put the notebook back. She never mentioned it. She was too afraid. But after the fire, she understood. Garrett had known the world would not end on September 21st. He had always known the prophecy was not a prediction. It was a deadline, a tool, a mechanism to force the final act. And the notebook suggested something even darker. That this was not the first time. That somewhere, perhaps years earlier, perhaps under a different name, Samuel Garrett had done this before. And that somewhere, perhaps years later, he would do it again. Rebecca Winters died in 2004. She was 59 years old. Before her death, she donated all her materials to a research archive at a university in California. Letters, photographs, documents, and a handwritten account of everything she remembered. The archive is open to researchers by appointment. In 2009, a historian named Catherine Bloom was reviewing the materials. She noticed something in one of the photographs, a group picture taken in 1962. 15 members standing in front of the farmhouse, and in the background, partially visible through a window, a figure, dark clothing, face turned away, but visible enough to be distinct, visible enough to be analyzed. Catherine Bloom sent the photograph to a forensic specialist. Using enhancement techniques, they were able to clarify the figure. It appeared to be a man, tall, slender, watching the group from inside the house, and on the wall behind him, barely visible, a map. A map with multiple locations marked in red. Catherine attempted to identify the locations, but the resolution was too poor, the markings too vague. She published her findings in a small academic journal in 2011. The article received little attention, but one reader contacted her, a retired FBI agent named Thomas Keller. He said the photograph reminded him of something. In 1977, Keller had worked a case in New Mexico. A religious community had been found dead in the desert. 12 people, all killed by exposure and dehydration. They had been part of a group led by a man named Simon Cross. Cross had told them to walk into the desert and wait for divine intervention. He said angels would come. He said they would be saved. They walked, they waited, they died. Simon Cross was never found. Keller said he had seen a photograph from that case, a photograph taken 6 months before the deaths. A group picture, and in the background, through a window, a figure tall, slender, watching. He said he had always wondered about that figure. He said he had never been able to identify it. But when he saw Catherine Bloom's photograph from Montana, he noticed something. The posture was the same. The build was the same. The way the figure stood, it was identical. Keller sent Catherine the New Mexico photograph. She compared them. She brought in a forensic analyst. They could not definitively prove the figures were the same person. The images were too degraded, too unclear, but the similarities were striking, enough to suggest a possibility, enough to raise questions. Catherine Bloom spent the next 3 years searching for similar cases. She found 4 more. A group in Oregon in 1966, 8 deaths. A community in Arizona in 1981, 14 deaths. A compound in Idaho in 1993, 6 deaths. A farm in Tennessee in 2001, 11 deaths. All involved charismatic leaders. All involved apocalyptic prophecies. All involved mass deaths under suspicious circumstances. And in 3 of the cases, photographs existed, group pictures taken months before the tragedies, and in 2 of those photographs, in the background, a figure. Catherine published her research in 2014. The academic community was skeptical. The evidence was circumstantial. The photographs were inconclusive. No concrete connection could be established. No single individual could be definitively linked to multiple cases. But Catherine maintained her theory. She believed Samuel Garrett was still alive. She believed he was still operating. She believed he had perfected a method, a way to create devoted followers, a way to exploit their faith, a way to orchestrate their deaths, and then disappear. Her research was largely ignored. But in 2017, something happened. A journalist named Michael Torres was investigating a new religious community in Northern California. The group called themselves the Children of the New Covenant. They were led by a man named David Shepherd. Shepherd claimed to have visions of an impending transformation. He said, the world as we know it would end on a specific date. He said only the prepared would survive. He said preparation required sacrifice. Torres managed to attend one of the group's gatherings. He took photographs, he conducted interviews, and when he returned home and reviewed his materials, he noticed something in one of the photographs. A man standing at the edge of the crowd, older, perhaps 70 or 80, watching, not participating, just watching. Torres sent the photograph to Catherine Bloom. She examined it, she compared it to her archive, and she felt a chill. The figure was older now, decades older. But the posture, the build, the way he stood apart, it was familiar. Catherine contacted Torres. She told him about her research. She told him about Samuel Garrett. She told him about the pattern. Torres agreed to investigate further. He returned to the community. He tried to find the older man, but no one knew who he was. No one had seen him before. No one could provide a name. Torres continued monitoring the group. He noted concerning signs, increasing isolation, escalating devotion, members selling possessions, cutting ties with family, preparing for the prophesied date. The date was set for June 15th, 2018. Torres contacted law enforcement. He shared his concerns. He shared Catherine's research. He begged them to intervene, but without evidence of imminent danger, there was nothing they could do. The group had broken no laws. The members were adults. They were free to believe what they chose. As June 15th approached, Torres became desperate. He published an article. He exposed the group. He named David Shepherd. He shared the photographs. He warned that history might repeat itself. The article went viral. National media picked it up. Suddenly, the children of the new covenant were under scrutiny, and then they disappeared. On June 10th, 2018, the entire community abandoned their compound. 32 people, gone. They left behind furniture, clothes, food, but no people. No forwarding information, no explanation. Law enforcement investigated, but the members were adults. They had left voluntarily. No crime had been committed. David Shepherd was never seen again. Neither was the older man from the photograph. Catherine Bloom died in 2020. Heart attack. She was 63 years old. Her research remains in the university archive, available to anyone who wants to look, but few do, because without proof. It remains just a theory, an unsettling pattern, a series of tragedies connected by shadows in photographs, and an unshakable feeling that something deliberate is at work. The last known document related to Samuel Garrett was dated 1973. No confirmed sighting has ever been recorded. No arrest has ever been made. No bodies from the missing members were ever found. Some say it was all coincidence. Some say Catherine Bloom saw patterns where none existed. Some say the figure in the photographs was different people, just someone who happened to be standing in the background. Others prefer not to comment.